exactly what I mean by that, but an annual celebration.
I'm glad those of you that are here this morning. I think it's an important day that we celebrate. I mean, obviously, we're not doing anything majorly different than what we normally do. But every year, whether it's Christmas, Easter, whatever, I think about churches. Like a lot of times, it's a real fight because, all right, so you got two sides. On one, Easter, Christmas, like those are the times people show up, right? Because I got to go my couple times a year or whatever, and that's maybe family like makes people go or something like that. However, on the other hand, you got a lot of people that, well, this is the day I got family coming over. This is the day I got the dinner. This is the day I have these things. And then they won't show up on these special days. And I'm thinking, so you're taking a day that's set aside to honor the Lord, and you're just, pitching that aside for family or whatever. And it's like, man, I feel like this is an important day that we ought to do something about. Now, a while back on Facebook, somebody had posted something along the lines of, why is it that we make a bigger deal out of Christmas than Easter? Basically, they're saying like that's when we celebrate the resurrection of Christ, and that's whenever it should be a real big deal. But really, we don't make it that big of a deal. And at Christmas time, it's really caught on to the season, with the lights and the presents and all this big thing. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it just from a commercial standpoint. Christmas is the big season, time of year, getting close to the end of the year, and it's just because it's just caught on as a tradition, as a big, like, exciting time. Easter, I mean, what's the deal with a bunny that lays eggs? And I don't think it's ever really caught on. People do it, and they make it fun, and they have chocolate bunnies and Easter egg hunts and all that kind of stuff. But it never really caught on if you think about it. Like they do it, it's fun, let's get it done and move on. And then there is a religious component to Easter. We don't really see that in a Baptist church. We don't do the Ash Wednesday where they put the ashes on their forehead. We don't do a lot of fasting, and traditionally we don't do a lot of that kind of stuff. And for the most part, it seems like maybe some of the denominations, Catholicism, some of the Protestants, will spend a little bit of time talking about that, and the days leading up to it, they'll do certain celebrations and stuff like that. But we tend to not really make that kind of a big deal about it. So it just seems like we give more attention to Christmas than Easter. Well, then I don't know, a couple days ago, I saw again something on Facebook that said, here's the quote. It says, "I find a subtle danger in annually celebrating that which should be a daily norm." Now that sounds good. A little bit super spiritual to me, right? It's like we ought to be celebrating the resurrection every day. And I find a danger of celebrating once a year what, we're supposed to celebrate every day. Sounds pretty good, but here's the problem. The Bible gives us examples of annual celebrations. And the Bible gives us, the greatest example of that, I would say, is the Passover. And so I responded to that guy, I said, he was quoting from somebody else, but I said, do you think is he talking about Easter? Is he saying like it's a danger in celebrating Easter once a year when we're supposed to be celebrating it every day? And I didn't want to get an argument. Believe it or not, I didn't want to. And so I didn't pursue it. But what I was going to say is, well, what about the Lord's Supper? And what about the Passover of the Old Testament? And how often do you do that? And even if they're a church, as far as the Lord's Supper, if they're a church that says, well, we don't do it once a year, we do it like every time we meet together or once a month or something like that. Well, still, shouldn't you be celebrating it every day? I mean, every time you eat, shouldn't you be breaking the bread? And what I mean? It's kind of like over spiritualizing something. The fact is, it's good and it's right to do something as an annual celebration, an annual time that people get together and they do something. I believe it's really good. I think that's why I love the fact that we do the Lord's Supper once a year. And if we were to do it all the time, I feel like it would take away from that. Just this one time we come together and we commemorate this. Now, I wanted to address that subject in this message when I first started putting this together, and how I believe that the Passover was a good answer to people that would say, like, well, shouldn't we be celebrating this every day? I mean, shouldn't we be? And truly, we do sing songs about the resurrected Savior like almost every service. It's not like we just save not like Christmas where you only sing some of the Christmas songs, once or twice a year. But I started thinking about that. And I was going to have the message where I just talked about annual celebrations and how it's biblical, and then how this is a day where we come together and we celebrate this thing. And I began to think about that, and I'm going to be honest with you. The problem was we had the Lord's Supper and hardly anybody showed up. I mean, Brother Austin was here, and the Casals were here, and my family was here. And the thing was, I preached about it every service on Sunday. I talked about it leading up to it. I preached about it on Thursday. I gave a big study about it. This is why we do it. This is why it's important to do it. We got to do this. And then nobody showed up. And I was like, honestly, a little bit mad, a little bit in the flesh when we got here and nobody showed up. It's like, maybe I preached too hard and everybody felt like they were unworthy to take the Lord's Supper. I don't know. Where is everybody? Okay. And so let me just say this. I know there are different reasons people can't show up to every service. We at the beginning of the year, we give out a list of here are all the major dates of things that we're going to do throughout the year. And we know people can't show up every time. We know we've got soul winning 3 times a week here at this church. We know people can't make every single time that they're soul winning. Okay, I understand that. And I'm not one to push or to shame or make people feel like they got to do different things. But at the same time, I feel like it is my responsibility. You say, really? You picked an Easter service to scold us? Right? I do feel like it's my responsibility as the pastor to say, like, I've got to make this important to people. I've got to make sure that we understand that there are some things as a church that we need to do together and we need to be faithful to do. There are some things that we need to do in sacrifice to the Lord. You say, well, that's a long way to go for a short service where we eat a little cracker and drink a little thing of grape juice and then we just go our separate ways. Maybe, but it's our dedication to the Lord, and we do it once a year, and it's an important service. And I've probably never really pushed that or made a big deal about it or made it clear. In fact, I've expressed myself that I don't even completely understand exactly how we're supposed to do it. But here's what I do know. Jesus said, as often as you do this in remembrance of me. And as often as you do this, you show forth my death until I come back. So it's something he wants us to do. Something the Apostle Paul knew that Jesus had passed on to them, because he went through and he explained all the things that happened at the Lord's Supper, at the Last Supper, and he wasn't at the Last Supper. So it's something that's been passed down. It's an ordinance that was given and that they continued to have. And so that's why we have it. Now, again, this message took a little different turn. And I'm not mad at anybody. I'm not here like just trying to get something off my chest. But I was going to talk about how it's important to have these annual celebrations. Then the message kind of turned a little bit whenever nobody showed up, because I was like, it's not that I'm mad and I want to just scold people and get on to people. And nobody likes to be scolded. So it's usually not received very well. But I do believe that I have a responsibility to do this. So let's look at a couple places. Look at Proverbs chapter 27. And unfortunately, we do have some visitors, so I have to apologize to you for the awkwardness of if it does come across as scolding. Hopefully it won't be too awkward. But look at Proverbs 27. Proverbs 27 verse 5 says, open rebuke is better than secret love. Okay, you could just say, well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let it slide. But the truth is, I think it needs to be said. There are some things that we need to commit to and we need to do for our church and for the Lord. And if we don't do that, somebody's got to rebuke us. Look at chapter 28 of Proverbs. 28 verse 23. He that rebuketh a man afterward shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. Now look, I'm I'm not one to flatter with the tongue from the pulpit. Now, there are plenty of churches where you can go and get somebody to stand up there and flatter you with the tongue. But do we really want that? We don't. We want somebody who's going to read the Bible to us no matter what it says, let the chips fall where they may. We want somebody who's going to encourage us, but at the same time rebuke us whenever we're doing something wrong. And so we got to be ready to hear that. Okay, 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5. And look at verse 20. Now, I'm not going to spend time going over the context of this, but just understand what he's saying here. Them that sin rebuke before all, that others may fear. So there's time whenever, people do need to be called out, rebuked, and what have you. So here it goes. Like, don't make too much out of this message from the standpoint of rebuking, but here's what it goes. I'm thinking about services. Okay, I'm thinking about annual celebrations of the church. I'm thinking about special days and services that we have or whatever. Go back to our text in Colossians 2. And on one hand, I'm very serious about this, and I usually make this very clear, okay? We don't want to judge how people feel God would have them celebrate certain days. I'm not one that's going to do that. I don't think that we need to judge people and say, well, that person doesn't have the right diet. That person doesn't celebrate the days, the way that they should. This is supposed to be a holy day, and they don't honor the Sabbath like they should. They don't go to services every time the door is open. I've heard messages where 3 to thrive. You got to go 3 times a week, or else you're not going to amount to anything as a Christian or whatever. And I just don't do that. And look at verse 16 of our text, Colossians 2, verse 16. It says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ." Okay, so there are some things that in the Bible, they were a shadow. They were a picture of things that Christ was going to fulfill. We don't have to take the Passover anymore. We don't do that. Whatever it's Seder, whatever it's called, It's funny because I preached not that long ago. I mentioned, because we were talking about the Passover. We were talking about the Lord's Supper, and I mentioned the Passover because I do feel like Jesus kind of instigated this new celebration of the Lord's Supper, an ordinance, but the Passover he fulfilled. There's no reason to take that anymore, and I made a big deal about that. And then I saw Pastor Tommy McMurtry had written something about the same thing, like all these churches were taking the Seder feast, or I think it's how you pronounce it, the Passover basically, and they were going back to like Jewish customs and traditions, which he said, you don't even know what those are really. People are just guessing how they did it and and they're just assuming like this represented that and this represented that. He said, but not only that, and this is what I've always preached, like it's almost blasphemous, I think, to take the Passover, because Jesus fulfilled that. He was the Passover lamb. It's like we don't have to go back and take that. He already did it. Now when we take the Lord's Supper, we look back at what he did, and we're celebrating that in a special way. And so, on one hand, we don't want to judge people and say, hey, you're not taking this, this thing properly. You're not honoring these days. You're not eating the right foods. There are still people, Baptists even, there are some Baptists that say you got to worship on Saturdays because that's when the disciples met on Saturdays, and that's when Jesus, in the Bible, Old Testament says, honor the Sabbath, and that was a Saturday, and so you're supposed to worship on Saturdays. It's kind of like Seventh-day Adventists, but then the Baptists are like Seventh-day Baptist or whatever they call them. And there are people that still think that we are supposed to, as Christians, be under the dietary law. and go back to the Old Testament and Leviticus and eat like they ate there. Man, everybody yesterday, like I said, we were soul winning, and everybody was making their Easter dinners, and people were like, I got a ham in the oven and all this kind of stuff. And I told my wife, I was like, I couldn't remember for a second. I was thinking ham was more of a Christmas thing, and then I was like, is ham an Easter thing? And she's like, oh yeah, ham's an Easter thing. And I was like, oh yeah, of course. Because we're not under the dietary laws anymore. We can eat all the pork that we want. Praise the Lord for that. But anyway, but there are people that still try to take you back under that. Now, I've known people that still, to this day, well, I don't know about to this day, but as far as when I was in Bible college, who still had a conviction that they shouldn't eat pork, and that God never actually, they showed me some different scriptures that God never actually said that we can't, that we're supposed to go back to eating pork. Long story, I won't try to explain his take on that. We had him over to our house one day, and before he told us that, that he didn't eat pork. And guess what my wife was serving that day? Ham. But what we did when we found that out, said, oh man, don't eat that then. We'll make you something else. It wasn't like, that's stupid. Eat your ham. Come on, don't offend me. You know what I mean? Whatever. For whatever reason, they wanted to stay under that. They had a conviction towards that. It's silly to judge. It's silly to make this big deal about it. So on one hand, we understand that. Look, here's some examples. I grew up in different churches I've been to. This was a common conviction that Sunday is the New Testament Sabbath. Have you ever heard that? It's the church Sabbath. And there's really nothing in the Bible that teaches that. We know that they met on the first day of the week, which makes sense. That's when Jesus resurrected. It makes sense that they started meeting then. But a lot of people, have said that. And then they've said this, because it's the New Testament Sabbath, which somebody just made up, we're not supposed to do any work on Sunday. We're supposed to just take it easy, and they're just kind of going back to the Old Testament in the laws about the Sabbath day, like this on Saturdays, and how they have some pretty strict laws, and then they've even taken it further now. If you look at the Jews and how many steps they can take, there's something about an elevator. I can't remember what it is, but maybe some of you guys know that. Like there's something about the elevator. They can only go to a certain floor or something. Something straight, or maybe they have to get somebody else to push the button for them or something, because it's like generating electricity, and it's really strange. It's a really strange thing that they base on, well, not actually the Old Testament, but on some of their writings and about the law. And there's a lot of strange things out there, but sometimes Christians will start pushing that and say, hey, you can't do any work on Sunday. And if somebody has to work, and they're like, hey, I'm gonna have to be late, or I'll be here this morning, but I won't be there in the evening time. We don't have evening service here, but in Iola, sometimes they'll say that. Or something happens and they just had to work, and we're just like, hey, no problem. Just do your work, and we'll see you next service. There are some churches that would be like, how dare you work on Sundays? And I grew up in our house. We didn't work on Sundays. If our job told us work on Sundays, we'd be like, hey, I'm sorry, I can't do it. Or most of the time, that was the kind of feeling we had. If I had a practice, like I was into sports and all that stuff, if they had a practice that fell on a Sunday, nope, can't go. And I'm not against that. I still to this day would probably, push my kids towards making that kind of a decision. But if someone else does that, it would be wrong for me to judge them and to force them to say, hey, you got to keep the Sunday and keep it holy, and in 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the Sunday, that's not biblical, because actually the Bible says that these things were a shadow, and Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath day. Okay, here's what it is. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. When we if we had to, that's a good picture of like the idea of doing the work. Like we don't have to do our works for our salvation. Okay, Christ died. When he died, and I can't remember where that is right now, but the Bible lays this out, and hey, you did all your work, and then we rest in the work that the Lord did on the seventh day. Okay, this is a picture of salvation through Christ. We don't have to worry about works. We're not doing works. Our salvation is based on what Jesus Christ did. We rest in that. He's our Sabbath. Okay, so he fulfills that, and we don't have to worry about that. There are also those who look at verse 18. I like this. So these people who are judging you and meats and all that stuff, which are a shadow to come, here's what they say. Let no man beguile you, verse 18. Let no man beguile you of your reward in a voluntary humility and worshiping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. I love that word, that phrase, voluntary humility. Basically what it means is like making himself to appear humble. It's not like a natural humility. It's like a false humility. Okay, look at verse 23. It says something similar. Which things have indeed a show of wisdom in will worship and humility. Okay, so will worship and will humility. Okay, this is what you're worshiping. You're making yourself do this in a kind of a false way, and you're making yourself be humble. It's a false humility. And neglecting of the body, not in any honor to the satisfying of the flesh. Okay, so a lot of times when people are going to try to hold you to something and they're going to judge you and say that you're not, you're only coming to church 2 times a week instead of 3 times a week, or you're working on Sunday, or it's wrong. It's wrong for them to do that. But on the other hand, as a church, it's very clear in the Bible, somebody needs to hold people accountable to doing something. Some people need to hold people accountable if they're going to grow in the Lord, if they're going to be profitable in God's eyes. And really, if you think about that, the Bible makes it clear that this is the purpose of the church. Okay, you say, well, what's the purpose of the church? Well, we all come together and have this gushy, feel-good sermon, and then we go out feeling better about ourselves and what that. Well, you're going to the wrong church if that's the case. Okay, here's the thing. Here's the idea of the church. We go out into the world. Go ye into all the world, preach the gospel. We go outside these walls, we preach to people, we try to get people saved. And then inside these walls, when we meet together, we're holding each other accountable. We're exhorting one another, provoking one another unto good works. All these things the Bible talks about. This is what we meet together. We need each other, and we need to be here. And so it's going to take somebody who is actually holding people accountable and getting on to people whenever they start slacking off or they start failing or something. And I'm going to tell you, being the pastor is very much like being the head of the house. Okay, and we could go back to Timothy and Titus and look at the qualifications of a pastor, and guess what? One of the qualifications is husband of one wife, having his children in subjection. Why? Because if a man knows not how to rule his household, how can he rule the house of God? Okay, which says actually being a pastor is a whole lot like being the head of the house. Okay, I'm the head of this church house. All right, now Christ is the head, I understand, but he's got me in place as an under shepherd to do these things. And that's very biblical. There's a purpose for that. And one thing I know about parenting, all right, I am a pretty passive guy. Like I don't have these huge expectations on my kids, and I'm not like jumping on them and, hey, you got your elbow on the table, and hey, you got to do this, and hey, you need to go out there and work, and I'm just not. Naturally, I pretty much just let them do their thing, and if I need help from them, I ask them to do something. If there's something that's required from them, I'll require from them, try to get them through school, try to do all those things. But here's what I found as a parent. If you just let kids do whatever they want to do, they're probably not going to end up doing the things that you feel they should do. You know what I mean? Because they're just going to do what they want to do. And so somebody at some point is going to have to step up, and the head of the household is going to have to take opportunities to try to correct some of the behaviors and say, hey, we're going the wrong way. We're not seeing some things happen as they ought to happen. And so, different ways that you do that. Different preachers, some people will preach a message and scold people. Some people will take people aside, or they'll call them and yell at them or whatever. All right, but I'm a pretty passive guy, but there's sometimes where I'm like, hey, something needs to be done, or we're going to get ourselves into a bad situation. And there's been a lot of times where I call like a family meeting, or I take one of my kids aside to go on a trip with me or something, so we can have a heart-to-heart, and I start telling them, hey, we got to be careful because we're going the wrong direction, right? And here's what you need if you're going to get your life on track, and you're going to do these things, you're going to be profitable for the household and prepare your future and all these kinds of things. But there has to be those times where you do that. There has to be those times where you invest in making sure that the people are doing what they're supposed to do. And you just hope that they understand it. Now, there does come a time where the head of the household has to enforce it, even if they don't understand it and they don't want to do it. The head of the household still needs to enforce it. But you hope that by giving them that talk, I don't know about you, but I know that at least some of my kids would have much rather me just spank them instead of going on and on this lecture like I'm doing right now with you guys. So let's line up and have our spankings and get it over with. So, but sometimes you're just hoping they'll get it. You're hoping that they'll understand you and they'll say, man, you're right. I need to start pulling my weight and doing what I'm supposed to do and be a help around here or whatever. And so you might have that kind of conversation with them, hope they do it. But if they don't, then you just have to enforce it and make sure it happens anyway. Okay, so honestly, as a pastor and as a dad and as a husband for that matter, because the marriage relationship's the same way. I'm still the head of the household, and that means sometimes my wife might be doing some things and I have to get on her and say, hey, that's probably not the way you should do it. Now, I shouldn't do that in front of my kids because that's teaching them something bad, but I need to go to her maybe and say, look, we shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't do something. And certainly don't, I need people to correct me too. I certainly don't have it all figured out, but that's my job. That's my job as a head of the house. This is my job as a pastor. It doesn't come easy. I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to say, hey, you just do your own thing, and I understand you couldn't be here. I understand you couldn't do that. You couldn't show up for soul winning. I understand. It's real easy for me to do that way, but I feel like it's necessary for me to handle these things. Now listen to this too. You can't read Paul's epistles and disagree with me that you can't come to the conclusion that I'm out of place for scolding a church that was organized under my leadership. Now somebody in Iola maybe could say, like, who do you think you are to come in here, start changing everything? We've been doing it this way for many years. But this church right here, I organized it. I started it. I feel a responsibility to say, this church has to succeed. This church has to do something for the Lord. Otherwise, all the work, all the effort's in vain, okay? And I believe He called us to start this work. And I believe He's provided for us. He's given us what we need to be able to do it. He's helped us. And for the most part, there's a good group of people that are faithful and they go out and they do the things they're supposed to do. But you know what? I slowly starting to see just a lack of zeal and people not showing up and other things being more important and having priorities in their life. And I think it's time that we say this. Hey, so here are some things. Look at Hebrews chapter 10. So what do I expect? And again, I kind of want to apologize, but I don't think I should apologize for doing this on an Easter Sunday. But I would have preached a different message if everybody would have just showed up on Lord's Supper. I'm just kidding. Hebrews chapter 10. Look at verse 24. And let us consider one another. Who's he talking to? He's talking to the church people here. Let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Now, as we see the day approaching, what day are we talking about? The day the Lord comes back, the day. The Bible always talks about the day of judgment, the day the Lord comes back. As we see that day approaching, the Bible's pretty clear that day things aren't going to get easier and easier until that day comes, are they? It's going to get harder and harder, more difficult. There's going to be more obstacles, more opposition, more persecution, more pestilence and earthquakes and all these kinds of things, bad weather, all these things that are going to stop us from meeting together. And we just can't do it. So much the more as we see that day approaching, we need to determine we've got to meet together. I'm not saying every single day. If somebody's sick, stay home. I understand that. If somebody, just something came up and they just absolutely can't come, I understand that. Now, I would appreciate people letting us know that they're not going to be able to come. If I would have known that who showed up for the Lord's Supper, showed up, that was all that was going to show up, we would have just had it in Iola, and I would have asked those people to travel down to Iola and did it. Instead of, spending all the time preaching all the messages, getting everybody prepared, coming out here, staying in a hotel Thursday night, so I didn't have to take my family back and forth, and then staying here until it's time to meet, and hauling everything up here and then taking it back. And really, it wasn't that big of an inconvenience to me, but I'm just saying, I wouldn't have done all those things had I known that people weren't going to be able to come. And so, really, here's some things that I expect as the pastor. Number one, I expect our church members to be involved and to be faithful in their local church. And I don't think that's too much to ask, because that's what God expects of us. And that's what we see in the Bible, be faithful to your local church. Not because of me. Don't do it because of me. Do it for one another, to provoke one another into good works and be an encouragement to another. That's right. But most importantly, do it for God. This is His house. This is how we worship Him. This is how we, carry out what He wants us to do as a church. And that's why He died for the church. That's why He started the church and gave Himself for it. And this is why He put in the church people, teachers and preachers and people that could help us to see what the Bible says and encourage us and exhort us to do the works. You don't have to make every single activity we have. I know that at some point that becomes impossible. Most churches, this is the case. I wouldn't necessarily say this church is that way, but most churches, here's the thing, they will always make it to the potlucks. They will always make it to the special outings on the things that they like to do. But when it comes to just being faithful to the Lord's house, hey, something else came up. I got family. I got, this problem or that problem, and they don't put the same kind of zeal and effort to get to the service as they would if it was one of those days that they really like. You know what I mean? That's just natural. That's just human nature. And this is why we need to confront that and make sure we do. When you're missing more than you're making at church, you're missing more services than you're making, when you get to the point where people don't even remember you, I'm not kidding. I've talked about different people who are members of this church, and they've been like, now who's that? That's sad. That means that person hasn't been here for a long time, and all it takes is missing one time, and then it gets a lot easier to miss another time. It gets a lot easier to miss another time, and before you know it, you're one of those people where the visitors come in, and then the next time they come, they're just like, oh, who are you? And they're welcome you as a visitor, and you're like, no, I should be welcoming you as the visitor. Okay, there's something wrong with that, but it's real easy to get to that point. And unfortunately, we've got a pretty decent group of people. If everybody showed up at the same time, this place would be pretty packed. And I'm not so much concerned about the place being packed, but wouldn't that be nice that we're all in unity and we're all here and we're all ready to serve? And Thursday nights, I'm preaching on my philosophy of ministry. And I was like, hey, you know what? It's time. People start stepping up and doing these certain ministries, and we need to have these ministries and organize a little bit better and all that stuff. And so I'm going through this every Thursday, this ministry, that ministry, hospitality ministry, is what we just covered. And then nobody shows up. Well, who am I going to put over these certain ministries, and how are we going to do it? At some point, I feel like if I'm not pushing faithfulness, if I'm not pushing, hey, we need people to be faithful, we need people to show up, we need people to be in their place, it becomes this one-man show. I'm the one leading the singing, I'm the one giving the announcements, I'm the one doing that. Well, there's some reasons for that. We've lost some people and different things come up, but it shouldn't be like that. We need to get to a point where everybody's got a place to serve, and things are it's just like a well-oiled machine. You know what I mean? This is my goal. But the main thing is, be faithful to come and support your local church and be a part of it. I expect you to make a special effort. I know things come up, but make a special effort when we have special services. We don't do a lot of blitzing, what they call blitzing. You ever heard of that? Or canvassing, where you go out and you say, hey, we're having this big Easter service. We're having this big children's youth rally or something like that. And so you go to the neighborhood and you're just passing out, hey, please come, please come, please come. We just spend the time when we're knocking on doors trying to give the gospel to people, and then we'll leave them an invite or whatever. But a lot of times people will do these blitzing, and they'll try to get people to come. And I remember in Iola, I was doing that with the teens. I was trying to get them, my what I told myself was I'm trying to teach them how to go soul winning. So we're going to do baby steps. First, just go put door hangers, and then they'll start talking to people and actually inviting them to come to church. And then they'll just start slowly teach them how to preach the gospel or whatever. But anyway, so they would go out and they would love this because they would get together and their friends would be there and we'd go out, we'd get some exercise, get some fresh air, put stuff up, and then I would take them and all those calories they burn off, I'd put like 3-4 times those amount of calories back in them with some drinks from the gas station and some snacks and stuff like that. And they're like, hey, this is so much fun. They sing silly songs when they're in the bus, whatever. So we'd have these big days that would come up and they'd be like passing all these invites. Hey, come join us, come join us, come join us, come join us. And then they had all this great time, as we got together to do that. And then the special day would come and they're not there. I was like, can you imagine inviting like all your classmates in school like to come to your birthday party, and when they get to your birthday party, you're not there? That's what I kind of feel like is going on. It's like, hey, you need to come to church. You need to come to church. Hey, you need to come to this special day we got going on. And then they're not even there. You know what I mean? I would think since it's your church and you love the Lord and you love your church and you want to be involved and you want to do those things, you would want to make a special effort to be part of special services. Okay. Again, we try to put out a yearly calendar. I try to give reminders. I know I'm not always the greatest communicator on what's on the list, but I try to say, and I always try to say this too, like when I first give that out to you, I'm like, if you see any dates on there, special services that we've got coming up, and you're just like, I'm just not going to be able to make that day, let me know, because if I get a handful of people that say, hey, that date doesn't work for me, we'll see if we can squeeze it into another date or something like that, because I want everybody to come and everybody to be involved. Here's the last thing that I want to say. And this is probably the hardest thing to say, but this is true. We had a couple that was coming down, a family, they had kids too, and they were coming down from Wichita, long drive, and they would sometimes come here, sometimes they'd go to Iola. And I was like, man, there's a lot of churches in Wichita. And they said, yeah, but none of them are like-minded as you are. We want to go out and do the soul winning. We got a philosophy very similar to y'all's philosophy, and we just love it. We want to be part of it. And I said, all right, great. I'm not going to stop you. Come. Problem is, when you live that far away, what are the chances that you're going to come to every service and you're going to come? You're not, okay? And we understood that. But sometimes those services got farther and farther away, and I'd start calling, hey, how you doing? Where you been? We missing you, whatever. And it's like, oh, well, this came up and that came up. Long story short, I won't get into any details, but they started having some serious problems, going on, some things that they were dealing with. And I said, man, this is naturally going to happen. If you're not faithful to church, you're not constantly under the preaching of the word, you're not constantly throwing yourself into ministry and being involved and being loyal to your church, that's how you grow, and that's how you actually grow in the Lord. How many people here, when you started soul winning, that's when your Christian life really blew up? Because it's like, wow, man, this is like, I'm here, I'm doing something, I'm talking to people, I'm preaching the gospel, and it's just like you become a better Christian in many ways because you're doing that. You really do. And the same is true, like when you just decide, I'm going to show up to these things, I'm going to be involved, I'm going to go ahead and, you all of a sudden have this vested interest in coming because you're like, hey, I got to be there, because if I don't go there, nobody's going to fold the bulletins. If I don't go there, nobody's going to, you know what I mean? You've got something to do. And all these kind of things just help to get you to that point. And so I told this couple, I said, there's a couple options that you have. Okay, you're either going to have to sacrifice and commit to come, even though it's a long drive. And to me, that's way too far. I mean, 3 hours is a long way to go to church on Sunday. Even if you're committed, I'm going to come once a week on a day that I can go soul winning, and I can, I think a person could probably do that, pull it off, listen to a lot of preaching throughout the week and read their Bible with their family and stuff like that, and probably would be okay. I would rather see people more, get involved more than that, just one day a week. But I said, if you're not doing that, okay, you got 3 options. Figure out a way to make the sacrifice. You say, well, you don't understand. I got off work and I'm so tired, and that's just such a long drive. Okay, but you're the one that said, I want to be part of this church because no other church is, So if you really feel that way, you're going to have to make the sacrifice and figure out a way. You'd figure out a way to do all the other things that you want to do. We all do that. Okay, I'm the first one to admit. People are like, yeah, you're so busy all the time. I don't know how you do it. I'm not that busy, because if I want to go for a run, I go for a run. If I want to go do a ultra marathon, I figure out a way to get there. If I want to spend the night drawing and doing some things that I like to do, whatever, I figure out a way to do it. We always have time to do the things that we want to do. You know what I mean? I'm never too busy to do different things. Okay, and if I was, I'd probably rearrange some things. We always make time to do what we want to do and make it work out. So make it work if you want to come. Now, look, people get themselves in some situations where, hey, I mean, literally, it's hard to humble yourself and say, I don't have gas money to get to church. That's a long drive. I don't have the gas money. But you know what? If that's what it takes, we'll get you some gas money. We'll get you here. Somebody will carpool with you. We'll get you a ride. We want you to be a part of it. But there is a second option. And this is what's hard to say, but it's the reality. You know, when we started this work and people said, oh, you know, where's everybody live? And I said, well, this person lives half hour away. This person lives there. Here's a lot of people, a lot of naysayers said, why don't you just send them to these other churches? I said, oh, we're like a family. We want to be part of this church. We want to see this happen, you know. And it's kind of like, oh, that's not going to work. You're too far away. You're a pastor way over there, and they're too far away. And like I feel like we've done just fine. But the reality is, you know, do you need to find another church that's closer? That was my final recommendation to this other family. I was like, look, it's just, you're not going to be able to strengthen your marriage. You're not going to be able to serve the Lord like you should be serving the Lord, get involved in your church like you should be involved in your church when you're that far away and you got so many things going on. That's just the case. That's just the way it is. So either you have to commit and sacrifice and figure out a way to be faithful, or find another church that's closer and be faithful to it. You're not going to offend me. I'll be sad. You know, we've lost people before that said, hey, you know what, this is a little closer, or whatever the case. I want you to grow in the Lord more than I want you just to be another person, you know, that hopefully will show up on a service. Okay. And then the other option, you know, and this was an option that I gave this couple. I said, you know, you can move closer to the church. You could find a job that's closer. You could, you could move out here and be more faithful to your church that way. That's a big commitment to ask of somebody, but that is a possibility. But it's going to have to be one of these, because I don't think any Christian should be just, you know, here every once in a while. I think they should be part of the church. They should be plugged in. They should be ready to serve the Lord, not for any rewards that I can give you, not any pat in the back that I can give you, but because you love the brethren and want to provoke one another to good works, because you need the brethren to help you to live for the Lord, and because you love the Lord. You want to be faithful to His church. Okay, and there's lots of churches. We're not the only one, but if this is the church for you, we got to figure out a way. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I pray you help this message be received well, and I don't believe that I was in the flesh or just upset when I was preaching it. So I pray that you just use it as you meant for it to be used, and we do it on an interesting day to do this, because it's a special day, Easter service. But I do pray, Lord, that you will help us all to make commitments to do a little bit more for you, and to be a little bit better in our faithfulness to you, and to make sacrifices where we need to. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. One more thing before we close. Look at our text again. We'll make this an Easter message. Are you ready? Philippians, Colossians. Okay. This isn't, where was I? This is an Easter message, but you have to look at the next chapter. Colossians chapter 3. Here we go. If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth, for ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory. All right, so if we, when we got baptized, we identified with Christ, with his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And he says here, if you be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above. This world's not our home anymore. We're supposed to be following Christ and seeking those things which are above. All right, let's get out our songbooks and be dismissed.